There's an inconvenient secret that the plugin industry doesn't want you to find out. Just like my previous videos where I demonstrate that the expensive analog modeling EQs just sound the same as free digital EQs, there's something very similar going on with compressors. Many people are fooled into thinking that the vast amount of compressor plugins on the market all sound radically different. Why? Because of those fancy interfaces again, and the marketing hype which misleads you into thinking that analog modeling compressors sound warmer, fatter, but despite the industry's most creative adjectives, there's a disappointing truth that you're not supposed to find out. All compressor plugins do the same thing. As always, I don't expect you just to believe me without any evidence, but that's why this video took so long to make, because unlike EQ plugins, you can't just use phase cancellation. It's much more difficult than that. I was searching high and low for some sort of tool that could help me quantify the differences between compressor plugins, and I didn't find anything. The closest thing was Plugin Doctor, but unfortunately it doesn't appear to be high enough res to really zoom in and see the fine differences between different plugins. Aside from Plugin Doctor, there's a couple of other things I bumped into, but none of them were high enough resolution, so I gave up searching and just decided to make my own analyzer plugin for this specific task. This is CompView. There's two lines for two different compressors, and you can see how well they match up. Aesthetically, it looks a bit ugly, but I just wrote it for the sake of this video, so it doesn't matter. What's important is that it's high resolution and it's very zoomed in, so even a small change on a compressor plugin has quite a large difference on the lines you see on CompView. These lines are showing us the exact gain reduction that the compressor is applying to the signal. So if we have two different compressors and they're applying two completely different types of gain reduction to the signal, then it's impossible that the lines would be on top of each other. They would be different because we're seeing the gain reduction that's being applied. Take for example this crappy looking free JS plugin with no interface, and let's compare it to the premium Shadow Hills mastering analog modeling compressor. Of course the two are different, of course. Oops! Just like is the case with analog modeling EQs, the knob ranges and values vary wildly between different compressors. Just like EQs, compressors come with varying different feature sets, and because of most of the compressor plugins have skeuomorphic interfaces, they're gonna not only have limited feature sets, but also limited knob ranges. So although it's not impossible like I just demonstrated, it's actually quite difficult to find two different compressors with their different knob ranges and features and match them perfectly together. So like my EQ video, we need a benchmark compressor that we can compare other compressors to, so that we can match everything to this one compressor. Something like a FabFilter Pro Q of the compression world. What is that? Pro QC? No, not even close. In fact, it's actually quite difficult to find a benchmark compressor because most manufacturers want to make a compressor which is easy to use. You can just twiddle knobs and get a good sound. If you throw too many features at it, or you have the knob ranges so wide that you can create really weird or bad sounding things, a really powerful compressor is probably just not going to sell that well because it's too difficult to use or it's too full featured for the average consumer to use. There are a couple of more advanced compressor plugins on the market. You've got Unisum, it costs 190 euros. You've got Compassion, it costs over 200 euros. You've got Alchemist, it costs $240. But even so, these plugins don't have the exact features I need to do what I want to do in this video. It's no secret that I'm a fan of TDR plugins, but those compressors unfortunately aren't going to cut it either for the purposes of this video. I searched and I searched and I couldn't find anything with the features that I was looking for, especially not something that's free. That annoyed me. So I thought, okay, I have to make my own compressor then. So here it is, the AP Mastering Continuously Variable Convexity Compressor. It has more or less all of the features that you need to do all of the different kind of flavors of single band downwards compression. It seemed pretty crazy to me that in 2024, there are 0 free plugins that have these features. But that's not a problem anymore because I'm going to give away my plugin 100% for free. It's available for Mac and Windows, and I'll tell you where to get it in a sec, but let's have a look at it in action compared to a few fancy analog modeling compressor plugins. So first up, I'm going to do a bunch of compressors from Slate, and this is the De-Stressor plugin, and as you can see, we can get pretty close, almost identical with the AP compressor. This is an example that uses the convexity knob to get that more S-curve shape. Next up, the Monster. So this is one of the biggest examples of the inertia control. You see how it's overshooting. But that's no problem for AP Comp because there's also inertia and we can do exactly the same thing. I think this one is supposed to be their 1176 clone, so it's got an extremely fast attack time. Looks really weird, but we can do that too. This is Slate's L2A type compressor. and we can match that pretty well as well. Not perfect at the end there, but it's close enough. I'm not exactly sure what this one is supposed to be modeling, but we can match that almost identically. Just from the graphics, we can tell that this is obviously supposed to be an SSL type compressor, and we can match it fairly closely as well. So we're done with the Slate plugins now. This is a UAD Fairchild emulation, and you might have noticed the hook shape there at the start of the attack. This is a dead giveaway that they're using feedback, but don't worry, AP Comp has feedback too. Looks almost identical. Also from UAD, we've got this deceptively simple DBX compressor. It actually has a bit of an odd shape, and it's a bit more difficult to match, but we get pretty close. Also from UAD, we have this API emulation here, and it seems every time I come up against API type stuff, whether it was the EQ before or this compressor here, it throws a bit of a spanner in the works. I'm not exactly sure what they're doing behind the scenes here. It looks like they've got a combination of feedback and all sorts of things going on. I can match it sort of, but I can't get the lines to sit exactly on top of each other like we've managed to do with some of the other ones. So that's a bit of an odd one out there. Interesting. Next up, we have a plugin from Acoustica Audio, and a lot of people mentioned this name on my EQ videos, so I thought I'd give it a whirl for the compression video. And as you can see, we're able to match that curve quite well, but there's something a tiny bit odd going on right at the start of the attack there. I'm not really sure what that is. Next up, we've got FabFilter Pro C. We're able to match that fairly closely, just on the clean algorithm there. But what is interesting is, if you get two Pro Cs, we can change the algorithm to different algorithms between the two plugins, and we can just match them with different attack and release times. So this is a good demonstration of how inaccurate the actual knob values are, because even on FabFilter, on the same plugin, we get radically different time constants based on the knob positions. Next up, the overhyped plugin with ridiculous sized knobs. I've actually worked at a studio that had a real hardware version of this unit, and the knobs are so big, it just is ridiculous. It feels silly to use, but despite the hype and the huge knobs, it's actually not doing anything that special. So there you go. If you have one single full-featured compressor, you don't need to buy a whole bunch of different ones. You can get all of the flavors that you need just in that one compressor, with the caveat, only if you know how to use it. If you don't know how to use it, it's going to sound crazy bad, and you're going to be better off just with an easy-to-use compressor plugin. The parameter ranges are ridiculously wide, so if you want to get a big, fat, gluey drum sound, you can do that. Or if you want to twiddle the knobs a bit, you're probably going to end up with something that sounds super bad like this. I could probably add even more features, especially to the release time, because on this video we've just talked about the attack time, and that's where I personally feel most of the character of a compressor comes from, the attack time. Now if you've got a super long release, you're probably not going to hear the attack time. Everything's just going to suck down. You're not really going to hear the compressor. But if you've got a short enough release time, you're really going to be able to hear the character of the attack phase, and that's where all of the character of the different compressors come from, and that's why I concentrated on the attack time in this video. That said, probably the most powerful way that you could make a compressor, the FabFilter Pro Q of the compression world, would be to do a LOT-based approach, a lookup table-based approach, where you can just graphically say the curve that you want. You could just draw it in, but my programming skills aren't so good that I can actually make something like that happen. If there are any professional plugin developers watching this that think that's a good idea and you want to maybe collab with me on that, get in touch, but that's just beyond my programming capabilities. So bearing in mind that this is explicitly an advanced compressor, is not particularly user-friendly, there's no presets, you need to know what you're doing with this. It's got incredibly wide, sensitive parameter ranges. If that's interesting to you, you can download it. Just send an email to compressor@apmastering.com and you'll get a link back with the downloads. There's Windows and Mac, audio unit, and VST3. And there's also a video in there which goes over the plugin and explains it in more detail. And also the Comp View plugin is there, as well as the test tone that I was using to make these tests. So if you want to use my Analyzer plugin to do any of your own tests, that's also freely available for Mac and Windows as a VST3 plugin. Now with a controversial video like this, I already anticipated a bunch of pushbacks to it, but I don't want to let the video get too long, so I'll save that for a future video. In the meantime, if you didn't see my 3-part video series on EQ yet, I'd recommend checking that out, especially the third video. I'll leave a link to that on the screen.